Hey guys! So today we are answering a subscriber question, and the question in question was, Frederick, what is the best way to plan a sprint in a small team of developers? So let's get into it. Well, the best way is going to be a hard thing for me to say, because that's a very subjective term, but I will give it a bash and I will give you the tips and the tricks that I've used myself to quite a lot of success. The first thing we need to address, though, is that in order for you to be able to even evaluate whether or not something is going to work for you, you have to know one fundamental thing about you and your team. And that is your strengths and your weaknesses. That is number one. The biggest failure within management there is like there's no bigger failure than you planning out work for a group of people who you don't know. And if you are a manager and you don't actually know your team, then you're either too high above them and you need to start thinking about having somebody who is closer to the team to actually do this sort of thing, or you simply haven't spent enough time to actually get to know these people. And it's about observing people. It's about understanding what makes people work together. And group dynamics is a big factor in the success of pretty much any type of management, at least when you're dealing with people. That's at least from my experience. So that's number one. You need to know your team. But once you have that, because any process that you're going to build is going to have to be oriented around the people that are actually there, because the thing is that if you sit and plan out a strategy or a process of some sort and you base it on assumptions such as, for example, that people are going to be on board or people are going to feel motivated, all these things factor in when you design a process of some sort. I've been there 100 times when I can, people come into me, it's almost that you can kind of feel it these days. They come in and they say, hey, I have this solution that is absolutely amazing in every way. And they get super excited. They sell me this idea and I sit there and I kind of go, yeah, that's great, but I don't think this is going to work. And they kind of go, well, of course it's going to work. Well, no, because you're not going to, this seems to be something that seems very feasible to you and something that you want to push for, but nobody here cares about it, or rather you're not going to get the rest of the team to care about it. And if that's not going to happen, it's just a problem waiting to exist within our structure, and that's not going to work. You need to have the buy-in first. So that's the first and foremost thing that you need to consider. But let's get into the actual concrete things that we need to talk about. So the first and foremost thing I will claim is that if you fail when it comes to sprint planning, it is due to basically three main points. Number one, you have a bad planning process of some sort, or rather you don't have an elaborate enough planning process. Number two, you have ad hoc stories of some sort. In other words, you have hidden work that you don't account for or you don't respect enough to actually account for correctly. And thirdly, you have a traceability problem. You don't actually know how to keep everybody up to date with how your work progresses. So let's just walk through it. So the first thing that you should do when you plan out a sprint is to have a discussion with your stakeholders about the backlog. In other words, you need a backlog that is prioritized with the most important tasks at the top and kind of cascading from downwards, because it's always important that you work on the most critical thing that you can at any given moment. That's the way that you deliver the most amount of value regardless of situation, because there are going to be situations when you're not going to be able to deliver everything. You are going to miss a deadline. That's just a matter of time. And if that happens, it's very important that you at least have been working on the most important stuff, because that is something that mitigates a lot of that problem with not meeting a deadline. And that's the first and foremost thing. So once you have that, you have a backlog that you have decided on, your stakeholders are happy with it, you will need to sit down with your team and you need to have a discussion with your entire team. All of the people who are going to be involved in estimating this piece of work. And usually, if it's a technical story, it's usually just going to be the developers and the stakeholder, like a product owner or product manager, tech lead, or some sort of such person, right? But the reason why you want everybody on board is because when the developers sit down and they're going to estimate a story, it is vital that they have access to the answers to the questions that they are going to have. Because what you're going for when you do something like, say, sprint work, which is an agile scrum type of thing, right? What some people think this is about is that it's just about estimating how much time something's going to take. That's only part of it. The most important part is that you actually have a discussion about the estimations from everybody's perspective. In other words, if all the developers estimate a story to take, say, 3 days, that's not so valuable. Either the task is very simple or you didn't really get so much from that. However, what's really interesting is when one developer or two developers think that something's going to take, say, 13 days and one developer says, no, it's just going to take 5 days. If their estimations are wildly off, that's when you get the most valuable thing from this, and that is the discussion about the actual intricate details. Because if you force your developers to talk about the actual details and the concrete steps that they need to take in order to deliver a story, they will very quickly realize that there are missing requirements, or if there are open questions, or maybe they can split the story, or they start to like use their collaboration and their brain, like use collaboration and their brain to start to kind of map things out, and the picture becomes much clearer and you get a much better estimation of what's actually going to take place, right? This is not always possible, but it is something that, you know, it is a process that is extremely useful. Once that's done, you plan out just enough work to cover the sprint. Never plan for more than you need, because the thing is that things will change and there's no point in you doing double work. So let's just start, like, end with saying that, right? Now, once you have estimated that sprint, you will start working. That's, you know, that's a given. However, now we come into the second thing that usually makes, like, causes an issue, and this is ad hoc stories. Now, a lot of developers I've worked with have this, sometimes they have this issue where they don't feel like it's necessary to create a card for every little thing on your Kanban board or whatever board you have, and some people just use post-its and stuff like that. That's a mistake, and I will tell you why it is a mistake, in my opinion. But basically, you get to this situation where you get these random requests from left and right. Things change, right? You have a sprint planned out, everybody's had a really good in-depth discussion, everybody's really on board and they know what they're supposed to be doing, right? But for some reason, some person comes in and says, hey, we're going to do this instead, and I need this, or this bug is absolutely critical, it needs to be pushed by tomorrow. And the problem with just fixing that, just kind of, you know, ad hoc fixing it, is that you lose the traceability of it all. If you have these ad hoc requests and you don't actually create a story for it, what's going to happen is that you are simply going to fail at basically measuring over time how your team is doing. And that's kind of the whole point. I mean, if you're going to plan out a bunch of work, it's vital to see whether or not this process is working for you. And if you can't do that if you're hiding work, because that's, you know, on paper, I mean, if the board is the truth and like the amount of features that you actually ship, the things that you are actually tracking that you're shipping, that's the thing that's going to be presented to your stakeholders, and business decisions are going to be based on those results. That's what's going to be measured. And if you can't measure the work you're doing, or if you're not measuring it, you're actually hiding work. What if you need more developers? What if there's a pattern in this system? Like, imagine yourself. Imagine if you're really frustrated with this one stakeholder, like person at the company who just comes whenever they feel like, and they just force you to do a bunch of stuff that messes up all the other stuff that you're doing. How do you prove that this is an issue? Well, you prove it by tracking every single goddamn request that person comes in and puts on you, and every time, and how much time it takes you to fix that, and then you present that. That's being data-driven. You can prove that this person is costing the company money. Same thing goes for bugs. You want to prove that your system has a lot of bugs and a lot of issues, you have to track how long it takes for you to fix a bug. Because if you just fix it and you don't track it, you have no data. You have no proof that this is actually bleeding money from the company. And it's extremely important. So make sure that you don't have to have a full meeting for every single little task that you get that is outside of the scope of the sprint. You just have to roughly estimate it, put a card for it, and make sure that you track the time of completion. And you know, some people say that in Scrum, oh, you shouldn't have these random requests. I'm sorry, guys, reality is reality, and reality is that you're going to have random requests. People are going to come with stuff. I'm sorry, that's how it works. So you might as well get used to it. And then finally, we have the lack of traceability, which kind of ties into the thing I just said. But one thing that is also very important is the traceability or the evolution of a story. Now, one of the worst things that you can do when you plan out work is that you think, and this is a very common mistake from people who have a poor understanding, and this comes back again to what I was saying, you need to know your team. If you plan out work as if, you're just saying that, oh, these tasks are all equal and all the developers in the team are equal, then you're making a big mistake, because not every story is equal. It is highly likely. I mean, in a perfect world, every programmer on your team is going to be able to do things equally. They're going to be equal in every single way. But usually that's not the case. Sometimes you have people who are truly equipped to deal with a certain problem and some people who are not. That means that there's a dependency, there's a connection between one developer and one specific story. That becomes a bottleneck, and you need to account for that sort of thing, right? So knowing your developers, then you kind of know that, okay, these stories are really not possible to work on. Not everybody can do this, only a few people can do it. That sort of thing is very important. But what's truly fascinating is that when you have decided on the scope of a story and somebody starts working on it, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is that you don't keep the findings of that story, or like as that story progresses, you don't actually document how the story is growing. An example is that, let's say that I pick a story, I work in complete isolation on that, and then I don't even talk to my coworkers, we don't sync or anything like that, I don't really do much in terms of knowledge sharing. And I sit and work on this very, very major feature. And as time passes along, I kind of have these small little discoveries that, okay, I need to fix this. And I have these questions. I see oversights in the requirements. And I go and talk to my stakeholders, and they give me information about, okay, yeah, you've discovered this. We didn't really plan for that. Or just do this or do that. You have all these ad hoc decisions that starts to just pile up. And they only exist in my head and the stakeholders' head. It becomes undocumented information because I'm a lazy programmer. I don't update the documentation, right? I don't update the requirements. I just have it in my head, right? And then I get sick. Who can continue that work? Well, none of my coworkers can. I mean, that card is like, my story is pretty much going to just sit there and wait for me and not be possible. It's not going to be possible for other people to continue working on it because I have a bunch of knowledge now. In other words, the story's scope has changed since its creation, and the only person who knows that is me and whoever told me that this changed, right? That's a big problem. So the way to mitigate this is, and this is why I really am against this idea of just having single post-its. When you do like a physical board, just use a digital one, because if you treat the story card as the single source of truth, in other words, I don't change the description of the original plan. All I do is like add comments or append decisions that I take as I go along, as the story progresses. Everything from, oh, I did this, I made this decision or that decision, I code reviewed it, I did this. Like, if you just kind of treat it as a append-only system where you just add more stuff to it, and the card becomes the single source of truth, you truly get a traceability where you can track for, okay, this is what we started with and this is now where we are. So you can see the whole flow of events that take place, which means that anybody who picks that up can, in 6 months, or even like if I get sick, very quickly get up to speed as to what the state of this story is. I mean, you should keep everything there, everything from files and documentation, like everything that is related to the story should be in that one card. So what I want you to take away from this is that when it comes to planning out sprint work, the thing that you should truly consider is, all right, first and foremost, make sure that you know your team. Secondly, make sure that you have these 3 things in line. Make sure that you have a planning process where you truly align everybody on what is going to happen. It's very important that every person on the team has the same understanding of what's going to happen, because if you're mismatched and you don't respect your work enough to actually sync up with each other, you're going to put yourself in a bit of a risk position. It's likely that you're not going to work as a team. You're simply going to work as a few individuals working as an island, and that's going to end really poorly over time. Secondly, make sure that you always trace everything you do. I mean, even if something just takes an hour, it doesn't matter if it takes an hour. Make sure that you document by adding a story for every single thing that you are working on, because that will help you trace and give you data to actually make informed decisions on, not today, but in 6 months when you actually want to act on something. It's extremely important that you do that, because if you don't, you're just hiding work. Thirdly, make sure that you have traceability on what's actually all the decisions that are actually taking place within a story, because it's gonna, in almost every story starts out in a original state, like a pristine state, but as it progresses, it's very common that new discoveries or new things, like requirements and stuff like that, comes into play. And if you don't document that, it's very hard for anybody outside who hasn't been part of those discussions to understand what's actually going on. And that's something that happens quite often. You have these like short little meetings, or somebody just talks over coffee, and all of a sudden the card is out of date. So, and you don't really want that. You want to have that card to be the single source of truth, especially for documentation purposes, because that's the way that you keep making sure, basically, that the requirements that you have decided on actually are documented. Because trust me, the worst thing that can happen is if a stakeholder comes in and says, why does this work this way? And you kind of go, well, but you told me that it's going to work that way. And they kind of go, well, no, I didn't. Well, if you look at the card, well, we actually did decide that that actually is the new requirements. So make sure that that card is updated. Have a great day.